And do you think it's going to work efficiently? Because
the female reproductive organ is essentially the basis of femininity, and a mere imagination of losing it to an illness could be nothing but traumatic, to say the least.
Actually, when I was sitting like this, I could feel it trickling. I could feel it.
52-year-old Doris Moreithi knows all too well about endometriosis and its effects.
I was about 12, 13 years old, and that it started with my first menses. I was a young teenager, I think one of the last in my primary class to have started her periods. But then when it came with a lot of pain.
Doris's experience was, however, manageable owing to her seldom menstrual cycles, which basically occurred after every 4 months. A few years later, however, her condition worsened, prompting her to seek medical assistance.
In that time, all they used to look for was PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, or check us for fibroids. Now, when they saw that I didn't have either, the doctors just said, don't worry, some girls, they can't handle pain, period pain, so she just needs to be a bit strong,
Doris, alongside her mother, had no choice but to accept the declaration coming from a specialist. Several years passed. By this time, she had already completed her studies at the university, and since the condition had not yet healed, she decided to visit a gynecologist.
When the ultrasound was done, they found what is known as endometriomas or chocolate cyst in my left ovary.
Among the doctor's comments, a surgery on Doris emerged as the best proposal to control her condition. What they encountered inside her body shocked them.
He did what you call ablation surgery to remove the endometrioma, but he found it was a real mess, that it had even the ovary had stuck to the lower back. And then they looked at my pelvic region, they saw how the adhesions and the endometriosis, all that, even going all the way to the urethra, all that part.
She hoped that the surgery would alleviate the stigma she was going through in the past. Contrary to her expectations, Doris, during her first menstrual period after surgery, suggested, while in excruciating pain, to have her uterus removed.
I bled for 24 days straight. The pain I felt this time round was like no other. I had relapsed after that surgery. Usually they say that ablation surgery is not very good. The best kind of surgery for endometriosis is excision surgery, when you excise it, because ablation will tend to cause more damage. Hence, that's what I was going through.
In the ovaries, sometimes the blood becomes encapsulated and it's bleeding, but where it's bleeding into is sort of in a sac.
Dr. Nelly Bosire, an obstetrician and gynecologist, explains in detail how endometriosis occurs.
The little black dots represent endometriosis. And the endometriosis basically means that this special lining of ours somehow found its way outside of this uterine cavity and attached at different points anywhere in the body. And when I say anywhere, I mean literally anywhere in the body. So the commonest places we find is within the pelvis. It can be outside, attached to the uterus itself, it can be in the vagina, it can be outwards and attaching to the ovaries, as you can see there, the fallopian tubes, can be anywhere. And wherever it is, remember these hormones, even though they are made in the ovary and they work here, for them to get from this ovary to here, they go through the bloodstream. And blood will go around the entire body, which means that it doesn't matter where this tissue will attach. This tissue will continue being responsive.
The presence of blood in organs that are not able to release blood leads to swelling and inflammation.
For instance, we have patients who have endometriosis on the umbilicus. And because you remember the umbilicus can actually be, it can actually bleed out. So whenever they have a cycle, every month as they're having their periods, they're bleeding from the umbilicus. There are patients who will have this in the intestines. And every month during periods, they have their stool blood stained because they bled into the cavity of the intestines and it came out in stool as blood.
Dr. Bosire gives an example of how endometriosis causes damage to a female's reproductive organ.
One of the biggest challenges we have is tubal blockage. However, the blockage might also not just be internal, it might also be external. So having inflammation, that's why you have a demonstration here where a lot of scar tissue formation happens, and this scar tissue can literally act like thread or a piece of rope and put pressure that literally blocks off the tubes. So they may be patent, but they've been forced shut because of a lot of scar tissue around that, because there's a lot of distortion of this tube. And whereas this should be the normal presentation, but the end of the fallopian tube, what we call the fimbriae, surely like finger-like spread out over the ovary, and this is how they are then able to pick out the ovulating egg. You can imagine what happens when it's so distorted until it's facing the wrong direction.
Despite the uncertainty of endometriosis, 1 in 10 women or girls suffers from the disease.
Most common complaint is just severe period pain. And sometimes it is so bad, there is no way to manage it, that you then may have to consider removing the entire uterus as a treatment. And it's actually stated that more than 50% of women with endometriosis will really struggle with infertility.
All this is well known to Doris, who since her entry into menopause, pain has become a thing of the past.
Over the last 3 years that I've been in menopause, I have had, almost every year I've had unexplained bleeding, but I mean, that's been it. I've gone back to the doctor where we've done some investigative to see, you know, an MRI and pap smear to check, but he's found nothing. You know, and but they say that with endometriosis you can also, it happens that there can be unexplained bleeding even in menopause. So I've had that, but so far so good. In terms of the horrible debilitating pain and everything, no.
Doris, through a group of women with endometriosis dubbed Endo Sisters, has written a book to educate girls about endometriosis among other critical issues and aid in early personal diagnosis of symptoms.
The menstrual disorders education, which covers issues of endometriosis, fibroids, you know, all these gynecological conditions, will be taught from grade 6, which is not bad at all, considering girls and boys are about 11 years old.
Ben Kirera, K24, Health Beat.